Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop. So our topic tonight is finishing your story, and you'll learn how to conclude and put the finishing touches on your short story. Joining us tonight is retired archaeologist and local author. Please help me welcome Sarah Wisseman.
Thank you, Salam. Can everybody hear me, or do you want me to use the mic? Okay, you can tell me. I can turn it on later if we need to. I will start with the slide. Can you all see it, or am I standing in front of it? We'll try to, okay, excellent, good. I am an archaeologist by training, which means I did history and classics and things like that in high school and college. I spent a junior year in Israel, which I'm thinking of an awful lot right now, as a non-Jew, and I was there to study archaeology. So it was my college junior year abroad, and it changed my life, because everywhere you sink a spade, there's history. I got to travel a lot. I got to work on an excavation in the Israeli desert, and it set my course. I almost stayed for graduate school, but I would have had to learn too many more languages, and I really missed my family in Massachusetts, so I came back to the States for graduate school and have been here ever since. At the University of Illinois, I started off working in the Old World Heritage Museum on the 4th floor of Lincoln Hall. Do any of you remember that? Well, you remember it was a labyrinth. We had storerooms out in the hallways interspersed with classrooms. We had an antique elevator that one of our visitors, he was a 6th grade visitor, and he wrote a letter about the elevator, and he said, "This was my favorite exhibit." So when I wrote my first murder mystery novel set in that museum, I was thinking of that space. I moved it to Boston to protect myself and anybody that I might have whispers of in my novel, but it's really about the top floor of Lincoln Hall. So I don't want this to be too much of a lecture, so please, if you have questions as I go along, interrupt me. This is meant to be a workshop, not a lecture. So before I start, how many of you are working on short stories right now? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And how many of you are writing other things, novels? Okay, excellent, good, because my material is a mixture. After writing scads of nonfiction for my university job, I started writing fiction, which was actually a very difficult switch for me, because going from academic writing to fiction writing is a whole new mindset. Fortunately, I was aided by my background in Massachusetts. My parents had a house full of mystery novels moldering on all the shelves. So I was brought up with a lot of the British greats like Dorothy Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, a host of other beloved books that got me reading and then thinking about writing fiction. Another big influence on me was some of what I think falls in the subgenre of romantic suspense, some mystery, some romance, a lot of travel lore. Mary Stewart, who wrote both the Merlin books and some other absolutely delightful books set in Greece and other places that really influenced my fiction writing. So, presumably, you're fairly far along on some manuscript now. Has anybody submitted to the short story contest? All right, excellent, excellent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to analyze your story structure after you have a manuscript in front of you, and the things that you can still edit or still might want to edit without spending money on hiring an editor. In other words, how to self-edit. Now, I think I've got Oh, before I go on, I wanted to show you some of my books. Most of them are up on the second floor. In the mystery section, there are actually 4 in the first series starring an archaeologist and museum curator, Lisa Donahue, who is a lot like me. Then a standalone book called The Bootlegger's Nephew, which is about a doctor and his daughter here in Champaign County in the 1920s during Prohibition. It started out being an archaeology story, but Prohibition very much took over. And then I did 3 novels set in Italy with a character named Flora Garibaldi, who is actually a painting conservator. But she stumbles into all kinds of dreadful stuff going on, faking paintings, marketing of antiquities, all the stuff that I love to study in archaeology. Okay, and we've gotten past this slide already. So the first part will be story structure, and the second part will be actual editing of language and polishing your manuscript. So even if you've already submitted something to the contest here, you might be thinking about trying to find an agent, trying to publish somewhere. So all of this is relevant. And how to get published is a whole different subject. And I'm sure at some point the library will have a workshop on that, because we all have very different experiences. I brought in a few books, and at the end of this talk, you're welcome to come up and take a look. Some of these you might find helpful. Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, and this is by Rennie Brown and Dave King. Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, a very old but extremely useful book. And you know, some of the grammar rules and other things have changed, but basically English grammar is fairly solid. People still argue about things like how many commas you're allowed to have. But fiction has rules, but it also has rules you can break. Just like academic writing has rules, most of which you cannot break, but some people do anyhow. This one I found particularly helpful for this talk, Writing in General and the Short Story in Particular by Rust Hills. And then finally this one, for those of you who are working on novels, I went to a workshop by this guy, Donald Moss, who's a major New York agent and editor, and it's called Writing the Breakout Novel. And then I have some bookmarks here. If you can take as many or few as you like, but they've all got my website there, so you can find out more about what I've written. Okay, so first of all, how is the short story different from the novel? I thought I'd start there, since this was pitched to me as being more about the short story than the novel. It's shorter than a novel, so every word counts. Every word counts. I have written more novels than short stories. I've had a couple short stories published in very modest venues. I haven't gotten into any paying anthology or anything like that. I am more of a novel writer because I like taking more time to tell the story. If you write a short story, it has to be very succinct. So one of my friends and colleagues at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute is Frank Chadwick. He's a historian and a local author. And he told me just last week, creating a short story is like painting a portrait. Writing a novel is the whole house, painting the entire house. So that's a good way to think of it. Another quote I have here, Linda Landrigan, who is the editor of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, which I first became aware of because of my friend, another local author, Molly McRae. She has had somewhere between 7 and 10 stories accepted by this magazine, which is a paying market. And I have had the good fortune to meet this wonderful lady, Linda Landrigan, the editor of this magazine, at mystery conferences that Molly and I have traveled to together. And I was looking for publications, for quotes, trying to figure out why I couldn't seem to get a story into this magazine. I tried several times. And this is her quote on what makes a good short story: a singularity of focus and intensity. Imagine a Klieg light that throws a single event into sharp relief. And just as important, the short story must have some kind of movement or trajectory. In other words, it has to grab you at the very beginning in a shorter time than it takes with a novel. You're allowed 3 or 4 pages there to get somebody hooked in, and come to a satisfying resolution. So what does she mean by this? I did a lot of thinking about this. When I sent in my first manuscript to about 60 different agents and small publishers, I got what some other writers call good rejections. But one editor said, "We like your writing, but you have too many sideshows." So that's exactly what Linda is referring to. You can have a couple good subplots, but if you start meandering all over the place, you're going to lose your reader. So you need a clear progression from the setup to a rise in tension to some kind of climax and resolution. So I started thinking of my deep past, some of my favorite short stories. Edgar Allan Poe, who really is the inventor of the mystery field. The Cask of Amontillado. He meets up with a frenemy, someone he's known for many years who has become an enemy, and plots how to get him alone in a wine cellar and do away with him. So the story is about the luring of this friend into a dank basement, and the victim is already drunk, so he walls him up with bricks while still talking to him. And you get to the end of the story and you realize he's just committed murder. But it's not till the end that you realize this is what's really going to happen. Shirley Jackson was a New England writer that my mother admired, and her very famous story, The Lottery, is about a small village that observes an annual ritual for purification of the entire village. And when you read it, you don't understand is what they're doing is selecting a victim to be stoned to death. So it is a profoundly creepy story. A much more modern one of my mentors is Chicago and Michigan writer Barbara Giamato, who Molly and I both got to know through mystery conferences and dearly love. She wrote this story, Of Course You Know Chocolate is a Vegetable. What a great title. You know, what the heck does she mean by that? Well, it's about a writer who takes a critic out for a special meal, a coffee place that has dynamite, dark coffee, and all kinds of chocolate to sample. Now, she's done some research on this guy who gave her an extremely bad review. And she knows that he has asthma and he takes a medication called theophylline. And as you go through the story, she gives you little teasing bits of chemistry. Isn't it interesting that caffeine and chocolate and theophylline all interact together? So if you have too much of all those 3 things, you might have terrible results. So while she's revealing these little bits of things that make you think chemistry is kind of fun and doling it out slowly so it's not an information dump, she encourages her critic to have lots of coffee and lots of chocolate. And at the end of the book, of course, he falls over dead, and she never touched him. So she's not a murderess. She's not a murderess. So I had a conversation with Molly by email this week. I said, Molly, remember all that discussion about a short story is supposed to have a little twist at the end? Well, yes and no. Some people say that, other people don't agree. So I said, Molly, if you were to define it, what is the definition of a twist? So this is what she wrote me. One that turns the given information around or inside out so it's seen in a different light and reveals the mystery or solution in a satisfying and aha way. So I was thinking about that. Another writer friend had us read a story that just knocked our socks off. It was about a hairdresser who's seeing a female client who comes in over and over again, and hairdresser's getting worried because she's seeing bruises on this woman's scalp and around her neck, and thinking, oh my God, this woman is abused. What should I say? What should I do? And so the tension mounts, and then she finally tails her client and goes to the client's place of work, and it's a female boxing establishment. So that's the reveal at the end, very satisfying, and you know, the reaction of the reader is saying, boy, I never saw that coming. Okay, the only kind of writing is rewriting. I happen to be one of these people who likes to pound out a first draft fairly quickly, sort of like laying a roadmap for myself. I am an outliner. I don't do it all by the seat of my pants, but I like having at least a rough manuscript to then chew on and embellish and come back and revise, because it's the revising and tightening up that I feel like is the most satisfying part of writing. But I'm scared to death of the blank white page. And Molly has said even on her 20th novel, she is still scared by the blank white page. So even if you've succeeded in getting published before, you're confronted like this. I also paint now, so you look at the blank canvas and say, can I pull it off again? All I've got is a blank white sheet or canvas. So what are the things that you need to think about? So I'm going to try to talk here about things that apply both to short stories and novels, and then finish up with a little bit more about novel writing. But here are the things that are in common to both kinds of fiction writing: the structure of the story, the language of the story, what can you fix in a second or a third draft, and then the copy editing, the grammar, the spelling, and missing words, which happens to be one of my bugaboos. I get typing so fast that I leave out articles, and probably most of you know, if you try to proofread your own stuff, your eyes see what they want to see, what your brain wants to see. So it's a good idea to get some help there. So your plot, whether it's a short story or a novel, can you summarize it in one sentence? Especially after you've been working on something that's a couple hundred pages or more. This is really hard. But learning how to do it can help you market your writing in so many ways. It's what you might use when you're talking to an agent, or if you go to one of these conferences and you realize you're talking to an agent or an editor in the elevator. What's your elevator pitch? What are you going to say in the short time that you have between 2 or 3 floors to get someone interested in what you're writing? So one of these books had an example here, the premise, the one-line summary. When somebody says, what is your book or short story about? A rogue physicist travels back in time to kill the Apostle Paul. That's an example. No. Yes, oh no. So I thought about it hard. My first book was called Bound for Eternity, which the title, you can steal titles, you can't steal other things. Bound for Eternity was the title of the Egyptian exhibit we were working on at that upstairs museum. So my one-liner is, an archaeologist discovers that an Egyptian mummy holds the clue to murder in her Boston museum. So does your one-liner sound enticing? If not, why not? What do you have to do to make it more attention-grabbing? Something I do at home, I try to do little diagrams of a plot when I'm working on the first outline. So many people talk about a novel having a 3-act structure. So I have a graph with murder 1 as a peak, murder 2 is a peak, and then the major climax is a taller peak, and then you have a resolution. So that has a kind of shape to it. The one-liner start is the basis of the snowflake method of story construction by Randy Ingermanson. And I didn't include the website, but if you just Google that, the snowflake method of writing, you will find it. So he says, start with that one-line summary, and then the next step is develop into several paragraphs, 3 disasters and an ending. So this applies much more to if you're writing a longer work than a short story, which really needs to hang together more. Okay, so that's about how far I am. And then he says, the first disaster glues the beginning and the middle together. The second disaster serves to add tension to the story right at the midpoint of the middle. The third disaster glues the middle to the ending. Well, I have to say, there are about as many roadmaps of how to write a novel or a short story as there are authors. So this stuff can be useful, but you shouldn't feel like you have to do it someone else's way. What you want is to figure out a way to do it yourself. What is your method as a writer? Character. If it's a short story, you may have a very small number of characters. It could be only 2. Are they vividly drawn? And how did you accomplish that? Do they come alive just not in your head, but on the paper and when someone else reads them? Okay. Does each character sound like an individual when you read it aloud? The adage, which you've probably heard in other workshops, show, don't tell. So don't just describe what a character is like, show by their physical attitude, their gestures, their language, what they're like, how they respond to different kinds of situations. So here would be an example. You could write, she acted nervous, which is basically telling something. Or you could write, she chewed on the ends of her hair. I have actually seen people do this. There was somebody in my choir who chewed on her hair every single rehearsal. And so my husband's a doctor, so he told me medical stories about you open someone up for an operation, you discover they have hairballs in their stomach just like a cat. So, and there's a name for this, which I've forgotten. Okay. Or another example, she crossed and uncrossed her feet while sitting on a chair. Something that, an action that shows this is a nervous person. Okay. Setting. Have you made the reader feel like he or she is right there? Is your setting so real that it's almost a character rather than just a place? Have you accomplished this without too much description all at once? Little bits of description kind of paired out. The Attic Museum, the reason I wanted to write about it was so darn peculiar, it really was a character in my book. It had the ancient elevator, it had attic windows, some of the glass was broken, so we had pigeons flying in and out of the museum space and leaving deposits on the Greek statues. When you had to lock up the museum at night, and since we had a staff of about 5, I had to do this, you had to set an ancient system with switches, call campus security, and give the name of a Greek goddess. So I had to say, I'm Athena closing the World Heritage Museum, and the guy at the other end would say, yeah, right, lady, you have 30 seconds to make the back door. So, and then you'd hear strange rustling from the birds. I mean, it is a perfect setup for a murder mystery. So that was a very real place to me. Point of view. In a short story, you're probably not going to have time or space for more than one point of view, but you might have two. In a novel, if you're like me, I have trouble writing to the length that most publishers want. So one way I accomplish that is writing from 2 or 3 points of view and having that alternate by chapter or a couple of chapters. Some people manage to do it within a single chapter and maybe just switch point of view with sub-scenes. But one of the things you really need to proofread for is your point of view clear to the person who's reading it, or are you mixing them up? Okay, and I think the last thing I have here, narrative pace. People talking about a novel may say that you have a sagging middle, and that's not for middle-aged authors, but it's because your manuscript slows down in the middle and you lose the reader. Is there a lack of movement? Does the reader feel stalled? In a short story, hopefully you have something that moves along, like the examples I've given, and you get to that satisfying resolution, and then you're done. Okay, any questions at this point? No? Keep going? Yes?
Well, when you're talking about novels, one thing that I kind of struggle with is how long should chapters be? I mean, I know that a chapter ends when it ends, completed whatever scene it's focusing on, but I just read Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead.
Uh-huh.
It's a long book. It's like 400 or 500 pages.
Yeah.
But the chapters are really short.
Uh-huh.
So I just felt like I was whizzing through it, even though it was a long book. And I like that. I would like to keep my chapters short too, but what is the thought about that?
There is so much variation. I too prefer shortish chapters, though I have loved some novels that had longer chapters. It depends on the kind of tension that the author creates, you know, the page turner effect, the making you want to find out what happens next. But in general, I know the first time I read Dan Brown, I said, wait a minute, these chapters are ridiculously short, and every single one ends up with a cliffhanger, and then he'd switch point of view on you, so you felt like kind of you were being knocked around in an elevator. That's more thriller style. At mystery conferences the mystery includes thrillers and cozy mysteries and traditional mysteries and, you know, a whole raft of them. So we have endless arguments about how to accomplish that. But we are all able to identify a successful author who keeps you reading. So I'll talk a little bit more about the things that keep people reading, but I don't think there's any hard and fast answer to how long a chapter needs to be. I think you said it yourself. It's as long as it needs to be. And the next section, when I talk about Nancy Pickard, may actually help. Was there another question in here?
Yeah, I was wondering about your point of view on second person.
I have read a couple novels in second person point of view, and I have trouble getting used to it, but that's probably just me, because most of the, you know, I go back to books written in the 50s and 60s, almost as old as I am, so I'm much more used to either first person or third person. First person can actually hamper you, because you can't show it. If your protagonist is telling the story, you can't tell anything that she hasn't seen or experienced. with her own eyes, her own senses, whereas multiple points of view, some of the most successful stories I've read will, you can do things like talk about the same event, but have different people's reactions to it and how it changed their lives. So if that is organized well, that can be very successful. So you can experiment. The old-fashioned story of, the omniscient point of view really is kind of archaic now, where you describe in a single chapter what different characters are thinking and feeling as they go about their day. And to me, that's not as, I don't really feel like I'm getting into an individual character's head when I read that kind of, if you're God up above and you're looking down and you know what each person is thinking and feeling, it's not the same at all. Any more questions at this point? Well, this might help. I went to a workshop. This was the beginning of a mystery conference, and sometimes they had workshops that you could pay a little extra for. Nancy Picard is an amazing mystery writer, beautiful writer, and I'm sure we have some of our books in the library here, if not here at Urbana, but she's well worth checking out. She read a book by Robert McKee on story. Now, he's a movie script writer, so you can learn a lot from screenwriters about how to tell a gripping story and how to build up to a climax. What you do, a TV show that has a cliffhanger at the end of each episode and they make you wait a whole week to see the next one, that kind of thing. But her system is called conflict, action, senses, turn, and surprise, or CAS. And I think this helps you construct a scene or a chapter if you get all of these elements in there. What she did in the workshop is she asked us all to bring an old Agatha Christie paperback, and then she gave us markers in different colors, and you had to go through a chapter and underline these different elements. So her suggestion is, she told us that her self-editing was to take a first or second graph and use colored markers and Post-its, whatever, and look for these 5 elements in each discrete chapter or long scene. So conflict, who wants what are the obstacles, what are the emotions? Conflict can be physical or psychological or both. So it can all be in someone's head, but it has to have a clear progression of tension. Action, acceleration in either movement, dialogue, or both. For example, a conversation that starts off friendly and then turns into a fight and might end up with some physical action. Senses, and this is where we really had fun, analyze each scene or chapter for taste, hear, see, smell, and feel. Do you have some of these references to things that you can see or smell in each scene to anchor the person in that time and space? There's another local author you might have encountered, Amy Hassinger, who studied at the Iowa School of Writing, and she did a workshop at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute where she asked us to write a scene with elements that create a sad or melancholy mood. So example might be, okay, it's a building in a town, but the skies are gray, the character has a sharp stone in his shoe, you see an old person shuffling, you hear sirens, so sort of gloom and angst. Then take that same setting and write it again with a happy, bright mood. So maybe the sun has come out. You can smell someone cooking bacon. You see a skipping child. You hear music. You get the idea. So you can use the senses to create a particular mood or atmosphere. The turn, she talked at the end, turn and surprise. Most of us had lots of questions about this, how are they different from each other? But she described turn as a change in direction, either mentally or emotionally. For example, the character starts out thinking, oh, my problem is really difficult, I'll never find a solution, and then all of a sudden it starts to get easy. Or the character starts out sad and ends up happy. That's the kind of place that might be an appropriate chapter ending. There's been a turn in the plot. The surprise is the reaction to the turn, and this can either be the character you're writing about, or it's the reader. It says, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. What a surprise. What a difference this new thing makes to how I feel about it. So that's Nancy Picard's system of casts. And since I learned about it, I have found that extremely useful. So that can apply to a short story as easily as it can to something longer. So if you're at the point of revising, you say, I'm about to submit this to a contest, or I want to approach an agent, what can I do to make it still better? Okay, good, I can see a clock. I forgot to put my Fitbit watch on because it had run out of charge, so I'm glad to know I have a little more time. Okay, so that's what I just talked about. Editing, language, grammar, the things that you want it to be so smooth that the reader does not trip up on it. Elmore Leonard is a famous author of both novels and short stories. And I already mentioned Strunk and White, the book that I brought. That's more mechanics and punctuation and grammar. So these are Elmore Leonard's 10 rules or 10 tricks for good writing. And I'm not going to read all of them there, but the ones I'm going to emphasize are: never use a verb other than said to carry dialogue. Yes and no. I don't totally agree with that, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Never use an adverb to modify the verb said, he admonished gravely. Again, this is kind of an older style, but I go back to some of these older books and things, and I was trying to sort out the room over my garage. This is a cat calendar here. This is a gorgeous example of description, and I don't care that there's an adverb in it. A black cat dropped soundlessly from a high wall like a spoonful of dark treacle and melted under a gate. I really like that. So there is an adverb in there, yeah. So it's good to start with some rules. As you become a more confident writer, then you figure out when you can break the rules. It's like learning anything else. It's nice to have a shape to what you're doing and sort of guidelines to follow, but there are times when you can successfully break the rules and develop your own style. Elmore Leonard says, at the end, my most important rule is one that sums up the first 10. If it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. You want it to be an experience. You don't want to feel like you're wading through a morass of words. Okay, I did have a couple of other examples, and I'm sure you've all thought about this, but okay, here's a really boring sentence. She went to the door. How could you make that more interesting without using an adverb? What kind of verbs could you use? Anything. Crawled, yep. Skipped. Staggered, there you go. Yep. Dashed, meandered, skittered, skidded, anything, an action verb that conveys a quality of movement. So staggered, someone who might be drunk, So things like that are things you can fix on the last draft through, saying, how can I make my verbs more vivid? I had a funny critique session a couple years ago. I read out a scene that starts on one of my favorite beaches in Maine, and I had some language, something like, you know, the waves slapped the rock, and then there was something else in there, and one of my critique patterns said, doesn't that sound a little bit like a sex scene? And I said, oh dear, that's not what I meant. Elmer Leonard says, no tag except said in conversation. But I think you could occasionally vary that. Like, what if you say, instead of she said, she snapped? Or he shouted? You can mix it up a little bit. Okay, now I've forgotten where I am. Okay. Oh, just a few points about short story versus novel. You have more time and space in a full-length novel for subplots, for additional characters, for changing in setting. A thriller, what they call high-concept thriller, the stuff that, you know, gets the really big bucks, they're usually international and have characters skipping around from North to South America or flying to Europe, you know, things like that. So you don't have to do that to have a really compelling story, but it is more in the thriller mode. The sideshows I talked about. Example, too much romance in something that's supposed to be a mystery. Well, again, it depends on what kind of mystery it is. Romance is very common in what we call cozy mysteries. Because of Mary Stewart, I like that kind of example. Avoiding too long an introduction or build-up. I very often rewrite the first chapter after I've written the rest of the novel. Sometimes I say that's the wrong first chapter. I should use a scene from a different part of the novel as the first chapter. And usually that's a good decision. And that's a holdover from academia. You don't write the abstract until you finish the paper. Or you write the abstract and send it into a conference and they take it and your paper changes radically and then you have to introduce it. Another example, and this is Mary Stewart. Has anyone ever read her novel called Madam, Will You Talk? It's set in southern France. It has a car chase in it. It's really a great story. So here's a paragraph now. The heroine is driving a car with the murderer in the passenger seat, and she remembers that there was a suspicious bulge in his pocket when she first met him. He had a gun. Where is the gun now? And this is the passage. Okay. I flashed a look at him as I lifted my foot a little. His eyes were fixed on the road. I drew my left hand softly off the wheel and with a breath that was a prayer, felt down beside me. There was a pocket on the car door. I slipped my hand into it, cold and deadly and infinitely comforting. The gun slipped into my grasp. I still think that's a pretty good piece of description, but I can hear Frank Chadwick saying, get rid of the adverbs, and other people who would say it's not the eyes that are fixed on the floor, it's the gaze that's fixed on the floor. So you can make corrections like that if you want to. You could get rid of the adverb softly. You could also eliminate the passive construction and the to be verb was. There was a pocket in the car door, and change it to I slipped my hand into the pocket on the car door. But I reread Mary Stewart for her atmospheric mysteries in different countries. So I don't really care if she has a little awkwardness in her sentences occasionally. So it's the total package that matters. Okay, what else have I got here? Oh, this is Strunk and White on misplaced word order. So what's wrong with this? He noticed a large stain in the rug that was right in the center.
Well, the rug isn't in the center.
Yes. So he noticed a large stain in the center of the rug, which might or might not be in the center of the floor. So, okay, so I'm getting close to the end here. Here are my own rules. Copy editing, I've discovered I cannot do a long piece of my own. I cannot copy edit it. I need someone else. Sometimes I have paid someone to do that, but that can be very expensive. Better have a critique group, exchange manuscripts, do it for each other. And if it's a short enough piece, say you're meeting with 3 other authors in the same genre, which is my preferred way of doing it, and you're reading a chapter or 2 per person, hand your manuscript to someone else and let them read it, because you hear your stuff in another voice and you pay close attention. If someone hesitates or stumbles on something you wrote, that's a good clue that there's something awkward about that. And then pay attention to the comments. Not too much, because you still are your own writer. You make your own decision about what works and what doesn't. But the reading aloud or having someone else read it, I think is pure gold. If you are going to present to an editor or a contest, make sure your submission looks professional. Follow the guidelines exactly. This is something I learned in the academic world too. You submit a grant and you don't pay attention to their rules, it goes in the circular file. They never even read it. So agents will tell you hilarious stories about getting stuff on scented pink paper, you know, things that people think will make their work stand out. Nope, not so much. Okay. So that's really all I have to say. Do you have any specific questions about your own works in progress, your WIPs? Yes?
About what you were talking about, where in Massachusetts did you live?
Oh, where in Massachusetts? I grew up outside of Boston. Yeah, so that's why I used Boston as the setting for my first book, because I figured I'd been back there enough. I still have friends there. I could be convincing about the setting.
So what was the name of that particular book?
Bound for Eternity. Bound for Eternity. And I wanted to have a visual house to make my character's house, so I used my cousin Lisa's house in Brookline and described that because I remembered it pretty well. Now there are some hacks you can make now. Google Earth. When I was trying to remember what Siena, Italy looked like, what the names of some of the streets were that weren't on the map, the names of shops, Google Earth will show you all that stuff. So then you can write as if you paid hundreds of dollars and been there recently. Barbara D'Amato wrote an archaeological story, which she asked me to read through. And her settings were Turkey and South American. So I said, did you go to either place? And she said, nope. She convinced me that she had been there because of the kind of research she'd done. However, there's a danger with that too. One of my favorite conference stories, one writer says to another, I used your description of that airport in Bulgaria because I'd never been there myself. And the other author says, I made it up.
Yeah, isn't that one of the rules about writing is write what you know?
Write what you know or what you would like to know better, because of my academic background, I love the research. So when I was working on the Italy books, yes, I've spent a fair amount of time in Italy doing archaeological work and researching both of my theses. But it's not the same as living there, like Donna Leon, who writes the mysteries set in Venice, which are marvelous. I would never convince an Italian, probably, that I had the depth of knowledge that she does. But I had guidebooks. Guidebooks are great. I had maps of the cities I was writing about. I had pictures. I adore Italian food, so I can write about that. And people said, oh, stop it, Sarah, you're making me hungry. You know, my characters like wine. Well, yes, so do I. So You can pull it off. It's better if you've been there at least once. I mean, you can write with a kind of authenticity that you can't possibly learn from books, but yeah. So that's partly why I stopped the Italian series. I said, again, I'm not sure I'm going to get back over there. I'm not sure I can pull it off again. How about writing something else on the East Coast? And so that's what I'm doing now. Slowly, very slowly. Other questions?
How many books have you written?
I'm on the 9th. So, and occasionally I'll write a short story and submit it. The conference that Molly and I like the most is called Malice Domestic. It always meets in Bethesda. Malice Domestic is named in honor of Agatha Christie, the traditional cozy mystery, and when they give prizes for best book or best nonfiction book about writing, it's a teapot, and they're called the Agatha Awards. So, and they have a hat contest at the end. I mean, it's hilarious, and the best part about going there was discovering a lot of mostly women, middle-aged women who'd had some other career who wanted to write about murdering their colleagues, and in fictional ways, of course. And then the people on the elevators got a little nervous. You know, the staff, they get on an elevator full of authors who are talking about different ways to kill people or different kinds of poison. And
How long have you been writing fiction?
I got serious about it after my husband and I went to Africa to celebrate our 25th anniversary and were in a car wreck. We barely escaped alive. So we came home. He thought about getting out of medicine early, and I thought about writing a mystery, and we both kind of looked at each other and said, don't wait too long. So, and that, my father, when he quit being a lawyer and moved to Cape Cod, wrote some legal thrillers, which he did not succeed in getting published, but he had a whole file of correspondence with New York editors. And the one that really took me aback, I opened it, I picked up, and he knows my father, addresses him by his first name and says, Tom, I cannot publish this novel. Your prose is as flat as the state of Kansas. Yes, that's unnecessarily harsh. So he did crossword puzzles instead and got them published in the New York Times. Any other questions? Yes?
How broadly do you read in like the thriller genre? Do you read a bunch of different authors, or do you mostly just stick to authors that you like?
I do go back to some of my old favorites. I believe in some rereading, but I also try to read as widely as possible. And, you know, I realized that when I got into it, that I'm probably writing books for other women, but I hope that some men will pick them up too. So I wanted to read more male authors too and figure out, you know, what is it that makes this so compelling? So, a couple of my books I would call suspense, because in my mind at least, you meet the villain fairly early on, and then it's a race to the finish. Is the protagonist, the heroine, and hero going to get there first, or is the villain? So that kind of book, whereas the traditional mystery, the whodunit, you don't know until the very end who the criminal is. But one of the rules there, and you better not break this one, is you can't have the murderer appear in the last few pages. It has to be someone who's been in view all along. And you have to make the reader suspicious of several other people too. The more suspicious, the better. So anyhow, it's fun. So do you want to tell me a little bit more about the kinds of things you're writing? We have a little more time, but not a whole lot. Yes?
Well, I've written a couple novels based in Rockford.
Okay.
Grew up in
Yeah.
Chicago where I went to school. Nothing about my life. One is about a young man with PTSD who self-medicates with drugs. And
There is help for you. Yeah, when I wrote my Egypt book, it's partly my husband's fault. It was going to be just archaeology. He said, I think you need something else. How about a little bioterrorism? So then we had a discussion about how to research that. He said, what about smallpox? So he sent me to the Center for Disease Control website, where they have a whole preparedness plan for smallpox. And then as I worked on it, I thought, what if somebody knocks on my door and says, why are you writing about how to weaponize this horrible disease? Who are you? Didn't happen, but these days it could happen.
Germ warfare.
Ah.
And then the novel that I'm working on right now is set in the Netherlands during World War II. It's about the Dutch resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of it is right after the war, and how they rebuilt, the characters rebuilt their lives.
Sounds
So
like something I'd read.
I relied on, well, I read everything I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
Both fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
Those times in the Netherlands. There isn't a lot written about the Dutch resistance. You always think of the French resistance when you think of World War II, but they had their own groups. And two of my characters go to a concentration camp, Mauthausen, which is actually in Austria.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I happened to be in Austria a few years ago when we went there. They have tours. And I learned a lot by actually being there, the feeling for the place.
Yeah.
And there were personal stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's pure gold. Yeah.
It was chilling, but it was very helpful.
I've even used movies sometimes. If I remember a favorite movie set in Rome, for example, and I'm writing about Rome, it's worth watching again. It's fun for me. I scribble down some additional details and then get out the map and say, well, I could describe that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess you just have to get your research wherever you can.
Yeah, and not all of us have expense accounts or can afford to travel to the places we write about. So we are incredibly blessed having the internet, despite its disadvantages. Oh, and something else I looked up just the other day, I was wondering, since we're reading so much about artificial intelligence, are they putting out editing programs for writers that are more than proofreading? And guess what? There are several websites that I'm going to check out, but with great caution.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like pro-writing aid.
Pro Writing Aid. There was something else called Simplified that I came across. I haven't looked in detail at it.
Autocrit. Those are really the only two I've used. I like pro-writing aid.
Pro Writing? Okay. Pro Write Aid. Well, anything that helps, but you may have seen in the News Gazette today, a couple of my colleagues in anthropology wrote about their kids using AI to write their papers. This is not okay. And they were caught, and they were flunked.
Good. I'm all for it.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Again, you can take a look at any of these books up here, grab a bookmark. I can stay a little bit longer for questions. And thanks again for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. A big thank you to Sarah, of course, for leading such a fantastic workshop. Just a reminder, you still have until Friday of next week, so Friday, November 10th. That is the final day to enter your story in the contest. So for more information about prizes and story guidelines, you can visit champaign.org/writers. And then the award ceremony will be on Wednesday, November 29th at 7 p.m. So we hope you can make it to that as well. Thank you for coming.